Hey, what's up? My name is Chris. This is video 2 in a short series on creating your own active JavaScript filter for posts on your site. Now, even though this might look like something that's dynamically generated, when I hit CSS here, like from the server, it's actually dynamically generated just with client-side JavaScript. We're just using plain HTML, plain CSS, and plain JavaScript. And you can see here it's actually searched and found CSS right here. There's CSS probably further down here. We've clipped this, which we're going to do today in the CSS, but it's searched all this text and has returned the first 6 results in order of date by post that contain that exact wording. I can come down here and click View More Posts, and that's what it shows up. Today we're going to work on the CSS for this site. All right, to follow along, you can go here. If you haven't done the first video, you can do that first. You'll probably already have the code. If you just want to start in at lesson 2, go ahead and do this. Jump down here, download the zip, and open it up in your favorite code editor. All right, let's jump right in. Okay, so this is what we've got from last time. We're going to work on CSS today. So let's go ahead and add a file here called style.css. All right, and for now, I'm going to just go ahead and paste in some kind of boilerplate resets here. I'm just setting everything to 0, 0, 0 and box sizing to border box. Lastly, I'm going to come back over this way and let's close the sidebar so we can actually see what's going on. Then I'll type link, :CSS and hit tab, and Emmett will add that out, and style.css is the default. So if I come up here and I hit save over here, it should actually start to take effect, and you see it does. We're going to rely heavily in this project on something called CSS Variables or CSS Custom Properties. The nice thing about these is they're native to the browser, and you can update them with JavaScript or things like that. So they're really flexible and fluid, and then you can also use them all throughout on spacing, on font sizes, on colors, and they just dynamically generate all throughout. No SCSS or anything like that required. Now I'm going to declare all of these on the root, which is the same as basically the HTML. We're going to have 4 categories for the variables that we set up. First of all, we're going to have some colors that we're going to set up here. We'll also then go ahead and add some box shadows, which is similar. It's going to use a lot of those colors. Then we're going to have some sizing variables that we set up. And finally, we'll just have, let's just call them miscellaneous. Okay, so we're going to use these throughout the site, so it's going to take a little bit to set this up, but once we do that, it'll be easy to make sure everything looks similar on the site and things like that. Now with my colors, I like to use Hsl Values, and I think you'll see why as we move through the project. I'm going to actually start by just setting a hue variable, and that's how you declare these custom properties. Just double dash, a name, and a colon. Then I'll come in here and I'm just going to type 2, let's do 220. And now I've got different colors I'm going to use based off of that hue, and when we change that hue, it'll actually change the whole kind of look and feel of the site. First of all, we've got a color called text here. I'm going to say var of hue to pull in that hue from up above, and then I'll actually manually type in the other values for HSL here. So 28.9%. All right, just like that. Now, you might be wondering, don't you have to wrap this in HSL to use this properly? And you do, but keep watching and I'll show you why I do it this way. All right, let me copy this down, and I've also got an accent 1 color that will have that same hue, but this time we're going to change this value to 43.6. All right, and then the lightness here, I will change to 57, 57.5. Let's copy this down. We've got another accent color we're going to use. It's going to be similar, but a little bit of a lighter color, and it's the same blue hue. But then it'll have 71.4 for the saturation, and then here will be 95.9. We're almost done with you watching me type in percentages. Let's come down here, and after this accent 2, we'll have a background color like this. Again, the same hue, and then let's change both of these again. Let me just grab both of those here. We'll have 100% of saturation, and then we'll do 99.6% lightness. So this is super, super light. So this is almost white with just a little bit of that blue hue to it. So those are our colors. Let's go ahead and come down here to our box shadows. So we're going to set up 2 box shadows, one that will be small and one that will be large. So let's first of all do the small one. One of the nice things about box shadows is you can create multiple box shadows on the same exact element. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to do 4 pixels, which means 4 pixels to the right, 6 pixels down, 8 pixels of blur, and then we're going to set HSL here, and then we're going to come in here and say we want our var accent 1. Now here's why I type my HSL values like this when I'm using them in the root. It's because I can come in here and just with a / now say 14% or something like that, and it will actually create an alpha channel off of that, and I can basically dynamically generate those alpha channels as I need to without having to create a bunch of variables up top. And now I can come in here, and for my second box shadow here, I'll have -3, that's to the left, 3 pixels, that's down again, 18 pixels of blur, and then a spread of 2 pixels. And again, we're going to say we want our Hsl var accent 1, and once again, we're going to add a bit of a transparency to it. So we'll do 12% like that. And then one final one, we'll do 2 pixels down, 5 pixels, or 2 pixels to the right, 5 pixels down, 10 pixels of blur, -3 pixels of spread, and then again, our Hsl, our var, accent 1, and then we'll do another transparency here of 20%. Okay, so that's box shadow small. And if these are confusing to you, let me kind of break them out just so you can see. We've got 1, we've got 2, and we've got 3. Sometimes people even will just show them like this, so I'll leave them like that to make it a little easier for you to read and follow along with. I'm going to copy this down. The only change we're going to have here when we come to our large box shadow will actually be the amount of blur and things like that. So I'll come in here, we're going to have 0 over, I'll have 8 pixels down, I'll have 10 pixels of blur. Come to the second one, we're going to have 0, and then 3 is just fine, 14 of blur, 2 pixels, that's great. And finally, the last one here, this will be 0 once again, so nothing right and left. We'll stay at 5. We'll move this one to 5, and we'll keep that at -3 pixels. Okay, so those are our colors and our box shadows. Now, the next thing we want to do is create some sizing components that we can use throughout the site, and that will allow us to keep a more unified look. So I'm going to create several of these. We're going to call this one extra large, just like that. And let's see, let's copy this down. This one will be large. Then we will have a medium. Then we will have a small. And finally, we'll have an extra small. Now let's get some kind of consistent scaling for these sizing variables. One of the websites I found that's really helpful for this is something called Typescale, I think like that. Let's look it up, typescale.com. There we go. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to set a perfect fourth, and this will actually give me just a nice little scale that I can work with. What we want is 5, so we'll take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How about like that? And we can actually adjust this later on when we get to larger screen sizes if we want to, and I'll come back to that in a second. Let me first of all go ahead and I'm just going to copy these one after the other. And I've got this little clipboard manager that will actually remember the order in which I copied these. So that's what I'm going to do here. And I think you'll see why I'm doing that. So that means I can come in here and just now paste them back in that same order. It saves me a bunch of time and it saves you watching me type out random numbers. If you're interested in that, I did do a video on my channel. You're welcome to look it up. It's for Mac only and it's called Pastebot. All right, miscellaneous. Finally, our last little section here. All we're going to do is declare a couple of radius variables. So we'll do radius of small. And we're going to do 5 pixels for this, and then we'll do radius of large, and this one will be 15 pixels. We'll add one more variable here under the miscellaneous. We're going to call transition. We'll just say all 160 milliseconds, and we'll do ease in. That'll work just fine. We'll use that throughout the site, and that way all our transitions look similar. Okay, we're almost done with most of the setup, and then we get to actually see how this works in real life. We need to grab a font, and while you can put this in the HTML, I'm just going to go ahead and put it in my CSS. I'm going to go to Google Fonts here and just look at Enter, which is a font I like. I'll come over here and let's grab 500. Let's give a little more space so I can actually see what I'm doing here. 7 and 9. That'll work. Now I'm going to grab the import here and just ignore those style tags. I'm already in a CSS file, and I'll just paste those in right here and grab this font family, and we will use that here in just a second. All right, let me pull this over, get this ready, and voila, watch this. In the body, add the font family, we're good to go. Okay, so that's most of the setup. Now we get to actually build this thing out. So the first thing I'm going to do is set a background. Now, if you go back to my original project over this way, you'll notice I've got this kind of really faint SVG background here. And where I got that from was a site called Pattern Generator. And I think this thing is pretty cool. You can come up with your own custom generators, and then you can save them to your local storage, and then just come in here and load them later if you want them. You can just use whatever things, and it will open them up. So these are saved patterns, and then you can copy them as like CSS background images or things like that. So that's what I've got, and I've got it on my clipboard now. Let me pull it back over this way, and if I paste it in, it's just a huge SVG, but you'll notice it actually shows that little sign there. Go ahead and do whatever you want. Come up with your own pattern. I use the colors that are obviously native to the site, but you can use whatever you want. All right, let's come back up. Let's see. We've got the background, the font family. Let's just keep going down here below the body, and let's add some more stuff inside here. We'll set the color for the entire site here. This is the text color to HSL, our var of text, just like that. We may change that in a few other places, but right now, all the text will reflect that, except for links. Obviously, you see that's not quite working yet. Next, this is part of our consistent structure here. We're going to use our variables, so extra large here, and then our var of large, and this will set the margin around the site. And those variables will help us retain that consistent spacing. We'll come down here too, and let's change the font size here as the default. Let me just remove this. We'll change it to our font size variable of small. Now inside the body, you might remember we had a container, and this is where everything lived. So here we want display of grid. This holds this area, the form, all the posts, and then this button down here. So there's 4 sections, and we're going to say grid template rows. We'll say auto, and we'll just say 1 fraction. And what that's going to do is set this to auto, this one to take up the rest of the space, and this one will actually set at auto as well. You can come here and type auto if you want. It's going to be the same thing. The browser will kind of infer that. Next, between each of these sections, we're going to have a gap of our var of extra large. And again, using this spacing now allows the spacing up top here to be the same as the spacing around each of these, because we've got a top and bottom margin that's the exact same. So it looks all unified. Now this container, we never want to be bigger than like 1400 pixels, something like that. And we want to make sure that it stays in the middle of the screen. So we'll say margin of auto. Now before we get to the post, let's go ahead and structure everything else. So let's grab that H1 up top. And in here, we'll do our var of extra large. There we go. Let's give a little more space here. And then I'll come in here and we want our font weight here to be that 900, the thickest font. We'll change the line height to 1 and then text align to center. Now, while we're playing around with these font sizes, let's go ahead and add one for the small tag. We'll use that in the HTML of the cards that we copied over last time, and we just want to set the font size to our var of extra small, actually. You'll see it actually sets these to the right size that we want them. All right, now we've got this search field up here. Let's go ahead and just use an attribute selector here. We'll look for our type of search. So anytime we have a type of search input field, we want to do a few things. First of all, you may have noticed when you come in here and you start typing that there's this little X that pulls up. That's not always consistent in some browsers. Safari, mobile at least, will actually add a little search emblem over here on the left just to keep everything more consistent. Let's go ahead and do WebKit appearance, and we'll set that to none. Now the background color here, we're going to want to be our HSL var of background. Let's add a border radius here, border radius of our var of radius large. Then we'll add some padding around the text here. So we'll do a var of small and our var of large. For the font size, let's do a var of small here. And then let's add a box shadow. That will make it stand off from the back of the page here. And we'll do our var of box shadow small, just like that. When I save it now, you see it starting to kind of pop out and 3D here off the page. Now, in order for this to work on mobile Safari and a few other things, we'll say we want, let's see, WebKit box shadow as well, and we want it to be the same thing. In fact, I think I might want this to be large. Let me grab both of those, select the first one, hit Command D, and I'll change them both to large. It just spreads it out a little bit, doesn't make it quite as harsh. Now we're going to want this to be our width of 100%, so all the way across the thing, so it's as wide as it can be, and then we're going to limit it just manually here. So we'll say we want the max width to be 400 pixels. So like on mobile, it'll stretch all the way across. Here, it's going to stay right there. Oh, and it looks like I kept my double cursor, so I'm had extra properties down below. Let's do display of block and then margin auto, and that will put it right in the center. I'd like that placeholder text to be a little bit more faded. So what I'm going to do is come in here and say type of search, and then inside here, we'll do 2 colons and placeholder like that. That allows us to select it. And then just to make sure that we get the same thing for Safari, iOS, we'll come in here and say the same thing, except this time it's WebKit input placeholder. Here we want the font size to be our var of small. And then I want the color HSL var text, and we're going to add a little transparency to it once again, like 50%. And it pulls away there, you see. We've got another one here. We want our type of search we want to be able to control how it looks like when we focus. So when that happens, we want to change the outline color from that default kind of really harsh blue to our var accent 1. And again, we'll do like a 50% opacity, something like that. And then we want it to be auto and 1 pixels, which I think is the default anyhow. That means when we come in here and click, it's now got a hue to it that matches the rest of the site. So I think I've got one more thing to do with this search input field, and that is to look at the web kit search cancel button like that. All right. And what this will do is it will get rid of that X. So if I come up here and show, when I type here, it looks like it pops up. So we want to get rid of that. You may not want to, but I'm going to get rid of mine. You can do whatever you want. No one will even know. All right. Appearance of none. Okay. So now when I come, let's see. Yeah, it's gone. Okay. So the next section, let's work on these cards that are going to pop up here. And that was all inside of a card called post container, I think, a div called that. We're going to have all of these in a grid container, so display grid. Now, I want these to stack next to each other as columns, but to wrap when they need to. And you could do this with Flexbox or something like that, but a lot of times I prefer working with grid because I like the flexibility it gives you both directions. So I'm going to come in here and say grid template columns, and we can say repeat, and then auto fit, min, max, just like this, and then we're going to give it 2 values. The first one will be the smallest it's allowed to get. Each of those cards can't get any smaller than 220 pixels, and the largest will be 1 fraction, which means share the remaining space. If I save this here, they'll now stack up next to each other because they can fit within this 220 pixels, and as I move though, eventually they won't be able to fit like that. And when that happens, they'll actually start to wrap naturally, and then they'll wrap again. And you might say those seem kind of crowded, and they do. So let's add a little bit of a gap. Well, we want a gap, and we're going to use one of our variables here of extra large. And now they space out nicely. Now, all of these posts are the exact same size, but by default, if they're different, they're going to stretch to try to meet each other both directions. So I need to make sure I come in here and let's say align items of start. That will make sure that they don't stretch. They actually just stay to the top. And if one's a little longer, it'll just stick out and it'll be totally fine. All right, so let's come in here now and start styling those posts. We want our background color to actually match the background of the page. So our var of background, just like that. And for this SVG, I use that same background color that we've got up top in our variables. So it should look very similar, except now you don't see the SVG behind it. We are going to set a border radius here, and we're going to do it on our, let's see, radius of large. Each of those cards is going to have some padding so they can breathe just a little bit, and we'll do it the same up and down and left and right. And then we do want a box shadow as well, and it's going to mimic that same box shadow as the input field. That was our var of box shadow, let's see, large. Now the post container is a grid, and this post is a grid child, but it can also be a grid parent. So I can come in here and say display of grid, and then we want a gap of var medium like that. You could also do display flex. You would just need to add an extra line to actually flex direction it to columns. But since grid naturally is up and down when you first set it, it's easier just to do it this way. And this top section here lives in a div, just this angular, these are the tags and the date. It lives in a section that's called post meta. And here again, we're going to do display of grid, and here we're going to do gap. And this is one of the areas we won't use any of our variables. We'll just set it to 10 pixels and it's going to be fine. Then we'll come in here and we're going to grab our post tag container that holds those tags. And actually, I think I had a double dash here. And here, they're going to be next to each other and wrap down. And so I think it's easiest probably here just to use display of flex. And we'll say flex wrap of wrap like this. And then we'll add a gap of 6 pixels. Again, we'll just manually add that in. Now you're not seeing that because nothing's here. Let's go ahead and add an extra one. I guess I could do this in the HTML file, but if I just right click and hit duplicate element, it'll actually show both of those and you see that they're both stacked here. Now let's leave that on so that as we update it, you'll be able to see how they wrap or get different styling and space out and stuff like that. So let's grab that post tag and see what we can do to it. So post tag like this, I'll do a padding here. And again, here's one of those where we're just going to hard code it at 3 pixels and 6 pixels. We'll set a border radius. We want everything to have just a slight radius to it. We'll do our radius of small here. Now you can't really see anything, so let's add a background color, Hsl var accent 1. And now you see them a little bit apart from each other, and you see that they've got that little bend to them, that radius. Let's set the color to Hsl var of background. So they've got a white tint to it and you can actually see the text. And then we'll set our font size to our var of extra small. And they get smaller and kind of fit in and they look more like tags. Let's get a little more space and then let's add our post date styling here. Here we want the font size to be our var of extra small. Let's see, extra small like that. And then we'll do text transform of uppercase. Now eventually we're going to want both the post date and the actual name of the person to share one more attribute together. So I'm going to do that up here. So post author name is what that class is called. And we want these to both have a font weight of 700, and that will make them just stand out a bit more in the card. Now this blue text here is a heading, but inside the heading is an anchor tag, and that's what you see showing up here. What we're going to do now is style that header. It's just called post header, like this. And then we're going to say we want the font size to be our var of medium. And we want the font weight just to be bold, which I think again is that 700. Let's go ahead and add that up top then. See, like this. Perfect. Okay, so we won't redeclare it here. What we will do is set a line height for this one that's different than anything else on the page of 1.1. And then a background color. We want our Hsl var accent 2. Now this accent 2 is just slightly more muted than that darker accent color. And you might remember from our kind of finished one, we actually have it stretched all the way out here. Now currently we have a padding around the entire card. So there's kind of two ways to accomplish this. The first is you don't have a padding around the card, but each of the children have a padding. I don't know, that seems like a lot of extra code. The second one is maybe a little hackier, but what we're going to do is actually set a negative margin on these. So let me come back this way. And we'll say that we want the, first of all, let's see, margin 0 up and down. And then left to right, we want it to be negative of one of our variables. You might think you can just come in here and say var like that, large. But that's actually not going to work. Nothing's going to happen. So what you have to do, and this might seem a little counterintuitive, but you're going to calculate in here your variable times -1. And that will actually spread it out the whole way. And we also want a padding on this. So let's set our padding here. And we want it to be var of medium. That's up and down. And then our var of large, that's left and right. And now it's like that parent padding never even exists. All right, it goes right out to the edges. Now because there's a link tag there, it's still picking up the default styling from the browser. So let's go ahead and fix that now. Actually, let's do this. Let's set the is selector here to active, link, and visited, like that. And we'll style all these at the same time. First of all, we're going to say we want text decoration to be none. That will remove that underline. Then we're going to set the color to our Hsl var of text. It'll look like the rest of the text on the page now. Now we're going to create a hover state here, which means here we want to say transition, our var of transition. And that variable will allow us to have consistent transitions. Let's copy this whole thing down. And now we don't want the active, the link, the visited. We want the hover, and we want the focus, like this. And we don't need a text decoration redeclared. We don't need a transition. What we need is just to take this, and we're going to say the text should be just slightly opaque, like that. So that when we come and hover, let's see, it should actually, yeah, you see just slightly go opaque on us. We could also just do an opacity here, but I've already got the color declared, so that works for me. Let's work on that author section. So post author, and here we've got this image, and then we've got two fields here. We've got the name, and we've got whatever their role or occupation is, their title, I think. I don't remember exactly what we called it. We'll figure that out together here. We're going to set these next to each other first of all, because these two are in a div and this one is in its own div. So this is the parent for those two sections. We're going to do display of flex, and we'll do our gap of var small. And then we'll do align items center to make sure that up and down they're consistently spaced. The first thing is our avatar itself, and that is called avatar, like that. Here we need to give it a border radius 50%. And then we're going to do a box shadow on this too. And we'll do our var shadow, let's see, box shadow, small, I think. Now it has some of that similar styling to the cards and the input box as well. We've also got the next little section, which is the role itself. And I think that is what we called it according to my sample code I've got over on my other screen, role like that. Let's remove this and let's go color here, Hsl var accent 1. So now it's picking up that color that's the same as the tag up top. Now you might remember in our original project here, we've got all of these sections, but to keep them spaced a little bit more evenly, I've actually cut them off after 4 lines, even though there's more markup there. Now, the way you would do that is actually come in here and grab the class, which was post body like this. And then what we want to do is say we want the line height to be 1.4 and then overflow to be hidden. Now, right now, nothing's overflowing, but we actually are going to cap that to limit it. We're going to cap it with something called WebKit line clamp, and we're going to cap it at 4. In order for that to work, we have to set a display of WebKit box like that. And then we have to set a max height of 7.3 rem. You just have to kind of figure out exactly where this stacks. And then we're going to set a WebKit box orient to vertical. Let's see, orient. And this will be vertical like this. We are getting an ellipsis there, but that doesn't always work. So if you set a text overflow to ellipsis, that will ensure that you always get that. Okay, so to my eye, we've got just a couple things left, and they're basically these buttons. So these here, and then this one down this way. They both share a class of button. So let's style that first, and then we'll kind of customize each to what it needs to be. So they're both going to have a background color of Hsl var, and then they have accent 1, and they've got just a slight, barely any opacity there of 0.96. They've got a color so you can actually see the text here, var of, let's see, accent 2, I think. Accent 2. Now they do actually have a box shadow as well. So the box shadow will be our var of box shadow small. And let's give them a little bit of space. So we'll do padding. And here, because we don't exactly have a variable that I want set up, I've showed you before how you can just manually type in stuff like this, but you can also calculate based off of those variables, kind of like we did with that negative margin. So I could come in here and say var extra small. If you always want to use those variables, you can just multiply it times something like 0.7 to make one that's slightly smaller without creating a whole new variable. Same thing here. Then on the right and left, I can just have my normal variable of medium, and that should work. So our border radius, though, we want it to have that same curvature, will be our var of radius small. Now, because it's a grid child, it's naturally going to stretch the full width. There are a couple ways to fix that, but I'm just going to fix it here by saying width is going to be max content, and that means it'll actually cap it back at just the space it needs. Font size then will be our var of small, like this. Now, to my eye, those button text could be spread out just a touch. So I'm going to do a letter spacing here, and we'll do 0.015 em, and that will change as the font size changes, which I'll show you what we're going to do for that in a second. And then text decoration here, we will set to none. And because some of these are buttons and some of these are links, let's go ahead and just do pointer on them both. And that way they'll both naturally have a pointer when you come over them. We are going to add a hover state. So let's finally do a transition of our var of transition like that. I mentioned they both share this button class, but then the next thing, this button view, this singular button down here, is going to have a few things that are slightly different. So we're going to have a background color here, and we'll have Hsl var. Here it's going to have accent 1, and it's going to have quite a bit of opacity up top. We set it at 0.96, but we're actually going to decrease it even more so for this bottom section here. Let's see, you got to spell things right. So accent 1. Okay, there we go. I'm actually going to use some default variables for this padding. It's not inside a card, so it doesn't need quite as much. It doesn't need to worry about space quite as much. So we'll do it extra small, left and right, and medium up and down. Now I promised a hover state. Let's give you a hover state. So we'll say is hover or is focus like this. And let's change a few things on this hover state. The background color, first of all, needs to be Hsl var accent 1. So for both of these, here it's going to move from very opaque to full color, and this one just to slightly opaque to now full color. And then we're also going to do a box shadow of none. So it kind of looks like you're depressing it just a bit, and you can see it ease like that. Now you may want to come in here, and I think I'm going to do this, and you might remember we've got a comma transition on all these elements here. You might want that to be slightly different. So what I can do is come down here and grab my transition and click this little box here in Chrome, and I can pull this around and mess with this and kind of see exactly what I might want this to look like. You can style this, and then as you actually hover, it'll change the effect. So let's say I was pulling this around, and let's see, maybe I wanted something more like that. I don't know what you think. Pull it like this, and it's actually showing you the speed of it here. So there's all kinds of different things you can do. Let's leave it like that. And then I can just come in here and copy this here and go up to the top of the document. And in this variable, since we set them all the same, I can just change it right like that. And now when I come in here and hover, they're going to have just a slightly more kind of delay, and then they'll rush down. So you can play around with those. I think it's kind of fun that you've got that in the browser now, rather than having to kind of guess at what it's going to look like. You can see it in real life. Okay, we've got one more thing we're going to do on the CSS. When I get bigger here, these cards kind of don't look right. That's because they're sharing so much space, they're spread so out, and I could use some bigger text here. Because we set all this up with variables, it's actually really easy to adjust. I'm going to go ahead and copy down this root. Let's come all the way down to the very bottom of the page, and let's add one single media query. You declare these by saying media, only, screen, and let's do min width of 768 pixels, like that. You actually do need a colon here too, I think. And inside here, we're going to redeclare that root. And I don't need to worry about any of this stuff. This will all be the same, so I'm going to delete that. And I don't need to worry about any of this. We're just going to change the sizing of the fonts here. Now what I want is I want my extra small to now be my small, and then vice versa all the way up, and we'll change the extra large at the top. So let's do this. Let's remove this and just say extra small here. This one needs to be small. This one needs to be medium. This one needs to be large, and then we need an extra large. And if I come back over to my type scale here, I can grab the next one up and just say we're going to move up the scale just a bit. So if I do that and I jump back over to my blog post filter here, it's all in the small screen size. But as soon as I get any bigger, it's going to snap and actually show me larger sizes right here. Now, one thing we're going to run into is you see that some of our numbers don't work with the text size. So I'm going to actually change one more thing in this media query so that we don't have this weird overflow thing and where the text is a little bit too large for the card. So what we're going to do is grab our post container as well. So post container, and we're going to set the grid template columns here to repeat once again. And then we'll do auto fit still, min max, except this time what we're going to do is say 380 pixels and 1 fraction, which means they're only allowed to get that small, which means they'll have better spacing as we move kind of down in the document. And once they get here, they go down to that, I think it was like 280, 270, something like that. But as soon as they snap up here, they actually need to be bigger, which means the cards themselves have more breathing room, that text fits better, the spacing all works better. So with that one little media query, now this thing is fully responsive and working at whatever screen size we set. Before I close out this video, let me kind of preview what we're going to do in the next one. You might come over here, and when you're loading, especially if you're not natively developing here, I'm going to come in here and slow down my speed. So let's go to like slow 3G, something like this. On the live project, when I come in here and refresh from source, you see we get that kind of transition effect here, where it's actually previewing what it's going to look like, that skeleton loading kind of style. If you don't do that, the whole site's going to wait and then pop up with those cards. And so what we want to do is kind of preview what's coming in, and it'll make it feel faster to the user and also reduces the amount of screen jumping around on the user. All right, so next time skeleton loading, and then finally in the final video, we will look at the JavaScript. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding.